In this video I'm gonna talk about that how can you change a measure using a slicer. Now this is the question that I get a lot. Before I start, I want you to explain the data model first. So I have a very simple data model here. I have a sales table and I have a calendar table, and that is kind of linked using the date column and pretty standard columns. In the sales table you can see we have a date, price, throughput, and the number of units linked with the calendar table like that. Now that I have kind of created a little pivot table here, in the pivot table I have actually pre-calculated for different measures, so you can just take a look at the formulas here that I've used. For total sales I've used a sum x function. For total units is nothing but the sum of the units column. For transactions is nothing but the count of the sales table. Unique selling days is nothing but the distinct count of the date in the sales table. So these are pretty standard calculations, and what I have done is I have placed all of these calculations inside of my pivot table. Now here is what I am looking forward to do. I'd like to have a slicer right here on my screen. In the slicer I want the ability to pick up any four of these calculations, and only that calculation should then appear in my pivot table. So if I change the calculation in the slicer, the calculation should just be devised to that calculation that is selected by me or the user. That's what I'm planning to do now. In order to achieve this, we actually need three things, and that's how we gonna proceed in this video. The first thing that we would do is, of course, we would need a slicer. The second thing that we would need is when the user actually clicks a particular value in the slicer, we need the ability to capture the value selected by the user. Right, that's number two. And the final part that we need is we need in that dynamic calculation that actually replaces the value in the pivot table, so it dynamically calculates whatever the user has selected and places that inside of my pivot table. So three things we need: slicer, the ability to capture the value selected in the slicer, and dynamic calculation. Alright, so let's just start with creating a slicer first. No, I'm sure you already know about it, but slicers can be created on a column of a table, so I need to have actually a physical table in my data model here, and I need to have one single column over there, and in that column I need to show kind of four values. I need to show like a text written total sales, total units, transactions, and unique selling days. I need to have that as a column. So what I'm gonna do is, in the modeling tab I can just maybe go to the new table and start making a table, but I've already made that table, so I'm just gonna show you that table. So here is a table that I have made, which is called as a slicer table. Note that this is actually a table. Know how to measure, not a column. Right, a table that I have made. Now there are different ways of making a table. You can either make it through Power Query, just type the data, or maybe get it to Excel. But I am using the simplest way. We're using DAX, so I start my table by writing the name of the table, which is slicer table. Start by curly brackets, and I write four values here: total sales, total units, transactions, and unique selling days, all in double quotes separated by a comma each, and then I close the curly bracket, and this gives me an actual table. So curly brackets actually mean that you're trying to create a table, and then you separate the rows of the table by a comma. Alright, so let's just take a look at the table that we have created using this little DAX here. So this is the table that I get. I have four values And now that I have a table and I have a column, I can actually make a slicer on that, so I'm just gonna maybe come back here and maybe pick up a slicer and just drag the value column in that, right, so I have value. Now value sounds like a bad name here, so I'm just gonna maybe make it more intuitive and select a measure, or maybe select a calculation. All right, now that we are done with part 1, we have created a slicer. Now we move on to part 2. Now we need the ability to be able to capture the value that the user selects. So now if you actually take a look at my slicer here, when I click on transactions or units or sales, nothing happens actually, because I'm not even capturing that value that I am kind of selecting in that, so I need a measure for that. So I'm gonna make a very simple measure, which is actually user selection. I'm just going to call this measure as user selection, and I'm gonna use the selected value function, and I'm gonna say, hey, why don't you go to my table? In that table we just have one column called value, and just pick up whatever the user has selected. So the selected value function is only going to show you the value selected if there is only one value. That is what it is going to do. So now if I just maybe real quick test this user selection function, so maybe I can just draw up a card. So I just drop a big card and I drag user selection right here, and you can see that since my total sales are selected, I get to see my total sales here. If I maybe select all units, I get to see total units here. Let me just also make the slicer small and unique selling days and transactions, just in case if I kind of not check any value here. This actually shows me a blank. That's an alternative value that shows up in case nothing is selected, or even if two values are selected. All right, so yeah, this works absolutely fine. Now that we have moved on from part 2 and we have captured the value which is being selected in the slicer, I need a dynamic calculation that actually sees this selection that the user has made, and then in the pivot table places transactions or whatever the user has selected. So I have made another measure called calculation, and I'm just going to show that to you. So in the calculation measure I use the switch function, which is like an if function but better. So in the switch function I say that you look out for a condition called true condition, like wherever the condition becomes true. So you see that if the user selection is equal to total sales, the word total sales, now whatever you have written in the table, which was a slicer table, that text and this text that we are writing it manually here should exactly match, and if it doesn't match, it would not give you the correct answer. So if the user selection is equals to total sales, then I will run the total sales measure. You can see that I already have made these measures to total sales, units, transactions, and unique selling days. They are already there right here. So if the user selection is equal to total sales, I earn the total sales measure. I run the total units measure if that is equal to total units, and in case of transactions I do the transactions. In case of totals unique selling days, I do the unique selling days. And now just in case if the user decides that, hey, I don't want to pick up any 4 of the values in this life, sir, and he leaves the slicer as blank, then I want to display a message. Select any single calculation. That's what I do. So now I close a switch function, and let's just now drag the calculation in my pivot table, unless you see what happens. Alright, so since I have actually selected transactions here, So you can see that it's actually showing me transactions here, and I have selected units here, so it's actually showing me units here and unique selling days. It's showing me actually unique selling beans. There is also a way to kind of format that, so you can see that it's showing by default 2 decimal places, and 2 decimal places should only come in the case of total sales. So I can just maybe make some tweaks in my measure to just maybe make that happen. So I'm just gonna come back to my measure and make the following tweaks. So I'm just gonna say that if I am actually showing total sales, I would like to format total sales and show that in maybe a 2 decimal places. So maybe in 0.00, that's what I will show. So I'll just maybe close the bracket here, and if I'm just maybe showing unique selling days, I just want to show a single decimal place, no, as in I don't want to show any decimal places. And you can similarly add that for units and transactions. Alright, so I'm just gonna maybe come into that, press enter, let's just see what happens. And you can see that since we have selected unique setting days here in the slicer, and the calculation is now showing up no decimals, and if I end up selecting total sales, it actually starts to show me 2 decimals. You can also add commas and stuff like that. Maybe I can just show that to you as well. So in case you are a formatting frenzy, maybe what you can do is something like that. I hope that should work. Yep, that was so 0, 0.00, so 0.00 actually stands the decimal. 0,0 stands for the commas. Alright, so this is good enough. I have made a measure, and that measure is affecting my pivot table, and I can certainly now get rid of all of these for calculation that I had placed. So I can get rid of sales units, transactions, and unique selling days, and I can just place my calculation here. Now one last thing which you will definitely agree with me is that calculation is a bad header. I don't want to show calculation. I actually want to show total sales, or whatever the user is selecting. Now I don't know of a way to dynamically change the header of this little pivot table right here, but I have a workaround. So what I can do is I can maybe take this total sales, make the size smaller, and I can just maybe place it on top of this scale right here, and then when I change that, it's going to look like that. The header is also being changed, so this is going to work fine as of now. I'm just not going to do it because it just calls for a lot of formatting, but when you definitely download this Power by file, and you will see that happen. So I'll just make an effort to do all of that work and give you that Power by file for the download. Alright, that was all about it. Of course, let me know if you have any questions, something that you haven't understood in this. Let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to reply and answer then. And once again, thanks so much for watching this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.